Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Your support means everything to us. We'd love to know, which geographical location are you joining from today? At home? On the go? Share with us below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Power. Douglas Harrington surveyed the Seattle skyline from his corner office at Harrington Innovations, the tech manufacturing empire he had built from nothing over 30 years. The rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers, matching the rhythm of his thoughts as he considered his legacy. "Mr. Harrington, your sons are here for the quarterly review," his assistant, Vivian, announced through the intercom. Douglas straightened his tie, a habit from his early days when he had to impress investors with nothing but determination and dreams. Now, at 62, his company dominated the precision medical equipment industry, with contracts spanning 3 continents and annual revenues exceeding $600 million. The boardroom felt different today. Douglas noticed the subtle glances between his sons, Nolan and Preston, seated together on the opposite side rather than flanking him, as usual. His wife, Marianne, sat beside them, her smile tight and performative. Something had shifted in his absence during his recent business trip to Tokyo. "Let's begin," Douglas said, nodding to the CFO. As the presentation progressed, Douglas observed the micro-expressions flickering across his family members' faces: Nolan's impatience, Preston's calculated gaze, Marianne's detachment. After building an empire by reading people, these signals were as clear as financial reports. Later that evening, Douglas returned to his Lake Washington mansion to find Marianne on a call in the garden, speaking in hushed tones. She jumped when she noticed him, quickly ending the conversation. "Business at this hour?" Douglas asked, pouring himself a scotch. "Just charity planning," Marianne replied, slipping her phone into her pocket. "How was your day?" "Illuminating," he answered, not mentioning the secured flash drive in his pocket containing copies of emails his private investigator had recovered. Emails between his wife and Richard Blackstone, his son's mentor and the company's head of product development. Douglas had first noticed the changes 3 months ago. Board members suddenly unavailable for their usual golf games. Department heads redirecting questions back to his sons. Marianne's sudden interest in charity events that coincided with Blackstone's attendance. That night, as Marianne slept, Douglas sat in his home office reviewing decades of business decisions, relationships, and contingency plans. By dawn, he had formulated a strategy that would make his upcoming chess moves undetectable until it was too late for his opponents. He made one call to an old friend, Samuel Westbrook, before sunrise. "Sam, remember that favor from Anchorage in '93? I need to cash in." Chapter 2. Shadows of Betrayal. Nolan Harrington, the elder son at 35, had his father's commanding presence, but none of his patience. He paced the length of Blackstone's downtown condo, the Seattle skyline twinkling behind him like a backdrop of stars. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Nolan insisted. "Dad's getting suspicious. I saw him reviewing the Morrison account yesterday, the one you restructured." Richard Blackstone, 50, with salt and pepper hair and a rugby player's build, swirled his whiskey thoughtfully. "Rushing creates mistakes. The board vote is in 2 weeks. We have the numbers. Unless he sways them back." Preston countered, younger than Nolan by 3 years, but with twice the strategic mind. "Dad built this company on relationships, not just contracts." The door opened, and Marianne Harrington entered, removing her designer coat. At 57, she maintained the elegance that had first captured Douglas's attention during a business conference in Chicago decades ago. "Douglas called Anton Petrosky today," she announced without preamble, naming a board member they thought was firmly in their camp. "Damn it!" Nolan slammed his fist on the marble countertop. "Did you hear what they discussed?" "No, but he's been making calls to all the major clients this week. Says it's routine relationship management." "Nothing routine about it," Preston muttered. "He's securing his position." Blackstone put his arm around Marianne, his eyes cold with calculation. "We have the presentation ready for the board. The company needs to evolve, and Douglas is resistant to necessary changes. The stagnant growth in the Asian markets is our strongest argument, which ignores the fact that he just secured the Malaysian partnership. Preston noted, Dad's not as out of touch as we're painting him. It doesn't matter, Nolan cut in. We have the votes. In 2 weeks, Harrington Innovations begins a new chapter without its founder at the helm. What none of them knew was that Douglas had installed state-of-the-art surveillance in Blackstone's condo months ago, when his initial suspicions arose. As they plotted, Douglas watched the live feed from his secure laptop, noting every detail, every name, every betrayal. The next day, Douglas invited Leonard Morrison, CEO of Morrison Healthcare, their largest client at $100 million annually, to his private lake house. The meeting lasted 5 hours. Hell of a thing they're planning, Morrison said, reviewing the evidence Douglas presented. You've been good to me, Doug. When my company was on the brink after the lawsuit, you stood by me. Restructured our contract when no one would touch us. Loyalty matters in this business, Len, Douglas replied. More than quarterly projections. What are you going to do? Douglas smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Watch them take the throne. For now. Meanwhile, Marion accessed Douglas's calendar from their shared home computer and forwarded his schedule to Blackstone, unaware that each action was being logged and tracked by software Douglas had installed weeks ago. Chapter 3. The Approaching Storm. The annual Harrington Innovations Charity Gala transformed the Seattle Art Museum into a wonderland of crystal and silver. As founder and CEO, Douglas circulated among politicians, clients, and industry leaders, his handshake firm, his smile practiced. From across the room, he watched Marianne laughing with Richard Blackstone, her hand lingering on his arm a moment too long. His sons worked the room separately, Preston with the board members, Nolan with the international clients. Douglas approached Howard Yamamoto, their head of Asian operations, who had flown in specially for the event. Howard, walk with me. Douglas guided him to a private exhibition room displaying ancient Japanese artifacts. Tell me, how long have you known about my son's plan to restructure the Asian division? Yamamoto's expression betrayed nothing, but the slight stiffening of his shoulders confirmed Douglas's suspicions. Mr. Harrington, don't bother denying it. I'm not angry with you. You're protecting your position. Douglas studied a samurai sword in its display case. The blade that hesitates invites defeat. I've always admired that philosophy. They approached me 6 weeks ago, Yamamoto admitted. The plan would dissolve my division and redistribute operations through regional contractors. 30 of my people would lose their jobs. Douglas nodded. And my position on such restructuring has always been clear. You believe our strength is in our people, not just our contracts. Precisely. Douglas turned to face him directly. I've made arrangements to protect your team, regardless of what happens next week. Your loyalty to them speaks well of you. As the evening proceeded, Douglas executed the next phase of his plan. He individually met with 5 key international clients, sharing drinks and reminiscing about their long partnerships. With each, he planted seeds of concern about the company's future direction, careful never to directly criticize his sons. Later, as the event wound down, Douglas overheard a conversation between Preston and Anton Petrosky in the courtyard. Your father's made an impressive showing tonight, Petrosky commented. Hard to imagine Harrington Innovations without him at the helm. Change is necessary for growth, Preston replied smoothly. The board presentation will make that clear. We appreciate your support, Anton. You have it for now, but I've known your father for 20 years. He won't go quietly into retirement. He won't have a choice once the vote is tallied. Douglas slipped away unnoticed, making a brief call to Samuel Westbrook. Sam, initiate phase 1 tomorrow morning, and reach out to Len Morrison. Tell him to prepare the contingency contract we discussed. The following morning, Douglas arrived at the office earlier than usual. He spent 2 hours in his private vault, removing certain documents and adding others. By the time his family and the executive team arrived for the pre-board meeting strategy session, he had composed himself into a picture of unsuspecting calm. Nolan led the meeting with uncharacteristic professionalism, outlining their quarterly projections and new market strategies. Preston handled questions about product development, carefully avoiding any mention of the upcoming board vote that would force their father's retirement. Douglas participated minimally, letting them believe he suspected nothing. As the meeting concluded, he asked only one question. The Morrison contract renewal is next month. Who's handling the negotiations? A moment of awkward silence followed. I've got it covered, Dad, Nolan finally answered. We're meeting with their team next week. Douglas nodded thoughtfully. Good. They're crucial to our bottom line. 100 million reasons to keep them happy. As everyone filed out, Douglas called his sons back. Just wanted to say I'm proud of how you handled the meeting today. Very professional. The lie tasted bitter, but he maintained his fatherly smile. Thanks, Dad, Preston responded, genuine surprise in his voice. We learn from the best, Nolan added with practiced sincerity. Douglas watched them leave, these strangers wearing his name, carrying his blood, plotting his professional execution. The storm was approaching, and he alone knew its true magnitude. Chapter 4. The Coup. The boardroom of Harrington Innovations fell silent as the last vote was counted. Douglas sat motionless at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as the company secretary cleared his throat. With 9 votes in favor and 4 against, the board has approved the leadership transition plan as presented. Douglas Harrington will assume the role of Chairman Emeritus, with Nolan Harrington appointed as Chief Executive Officer and Preston Harrington as Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. Preston couldn't quite meet his father's eyes, but Nolan showed no such reservation, his smile triumphant as scattered applause broke out among their supporters. I'd like to say a few words, Douglas spoke, his voice steady despite the professional assassination he'd just witnessed. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. 30 years ago, I built this company with nothing but determination and a vision for how medical technology could change lives. I've watched it grow from a workshop in my garage to an international leader. He paused, scanning the faces around him, board members who had known him for decades, now avoiding his gaze. To my sons, I offer congratulations. Leadership is a privilege and a burden. May you carry both with wisdom. He gathered his papers methodically. As my final act as CEO, I've prepared transition folders for each of you, outlining ongoing projects and client relationships that require immediate attention. Douglas distributed leather portfolios to each board member, his sons, and key executives. I'll clear my office by the end of the day. As the meeting adjourned, Richard Blackstone approached Douglas with an outstretched hand. Douglas, I hope there are no hard feelings. The company needed this change. Douglas regarded Blackstone's hand, but didn't take it. Richard, I've always appreciated your directness. It's why I hired you 15 years ago when no one else would touch you after the Mentec scandal. He leaned closer. Remember that what can be built can also be dismantled. Later that afternoon, as Douglas packed his personal items under the watchful eye of security, his son's first executive decision, Mary Ann appeared in his doorway. They told me at reception, she said. I came as soon as I heard. Did you? Douglas continued packing, not looking up. Interesting, since you knew about this weeks ago. Your call to Blackstone last night confirmed the votes were secured. Color drained from Mary Ann's face. Douglas, save it. He finally met her gaze. 36 years of marriage, and you couldn't even do me the courtesy of admitting you wanted me gone. He handed her a small box from his desk. Your anniversary gift. I was going to give it to you next week, but circumstances have changed. Inside was a diamond bracelet she had admired months ago. Douglas walked past her without another word, carrying a single box of belongings. Security escorted him to the lobby where his sons waited by the entrance. This company is ours now, old man, Nolan declared, loud enough for the gathered employees to hear. The board agreed it's time for new blood. Your time is over, Marian added with a laugh, having composed herself and joined them, standing closer to Blackstone than to her sons. Douglas looked at them, his family transformed into strangers, and nodded once. We'll see. That evening, as the 4 conspirators celebrated at Blackstone's condo with champagne, Douglas sat alone in his home office, making a single phone call. Leonard, it's Douglas. They did exactly as we anticipated. Are you ready to proceed? The paperwork is already being filed, Leonard Morrison confirmed. My board approved the contract transfer this morning. Effective immediately, Morrison Healthcare's business relationship is with Harrington Medical Solutions, not Harrington Innovations. Douglas smiled for the first time that day. And the Malaysian Consortium? They're following our lead. The $60 million expansion project will go through your new company. Perfect. Let the game begin. Chapter 5. Foundation of Ruin. Preston Harrington stared at the financial reports in disbelief, running his hand through his hair for the fifth time in as many minutes. It had been 6 days since they had forced his father into retirement, and things were already unraveling at alarming speed. This can't be right, he muttered, turning to the nervous CFO. Morrison Healthcare can't just terminate a $100 million contract without cause or notice. They did, the CFO confirmed. The contract had a leadership change clause that allowed for immediate termination. It was buried in subsection 12.4 that your father personally negotiated with Leonard Morrison last year. And Malaysian deal? Pulled out yesterday. Same clause, different contract. Nolan burst into the conference room, his face flushed with rage. The Yoshida Group just canceled. That's 3 major clients in a week. Preston turned to his brother. We're hemorrhaging contracts. $160 million in recurring revenue gone. Get Dad on the phone. Nolan ordered an assistant. I've tried, the young woman replied nervously. He's not accepting calls from the company line. Then try his personal number. It's been disconnected. Marianne entered with Richard Blackstone, both looking increasingly concerned. The Westbrook Foundation just pulled their research funding, she announced. Samuel Westbrook specifically cited Douglas's departure as the reason. Westbrook, Nolan scoffed. That foundation contributes what, $5 million? We can manage without it. The foundation itself, yes, Preston said quietly, reviewing another document that had just been delivered. But apparently, Westbrook personally guaranteed the loans for our expansion into the Canadian market. Without that guarantee, the bank is calling the notes due. All of them. That's $40 million. Nolan slammed his fist on the table. They can't do that. They can and they are, the CFO confirmed. The guarantee was contingent on Douglas Harrington's active leadership role. Blackstone loosened his tie, his earlier confidence evaporating. We need to call an emergency board meeting. This is a coordinated attack. By my father, Preston said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. He anticipated everything. These clauses, these relationships, he's been planning this for months. Later that day, as the board members assembled in panic, Preston pulled up an article on his tablet. You need to see this, he told his brother, passing him the device. The headline read, Medical technology pioneer Douglas Harrington launches new venture, Harrington Medical Solutions. He started a competing company? Nolan hissed. That's a breach of his non-compete. Preston shook his head. There is no non-compete. I checked his employment contract this morning. It was amended last year to remove that clause. The board approved it unanimously, including us. We thought it was a routine update. The board meeting quickly devolved into accusations and blame. Anton Petrosky, who had voted for the leadership change, now voiced what many were thinking. We've been outmaneuvered. Douglas built this company on relationships, not just contracts and products. Those relationships are walking out the door with him. By the end of the week, Harrington Innovation stock had plummeted 42%. Emergency measures were implemented. Layoffs announced, projects canceled, expenses slashed. The Malaysian expansion that was supposed to be Preston's legacy project was indefinitely shelved. Marianne found herself increasingly isolated, not just from her former social circle, where Douglas's influence ran deep, but even within the company. Executives who had smiled at her a week ago now avoided eye contact. Her calls to family friends went unreturned. We need to talk to him, she finally admitted to her sons during a crisis meeting at the empty Harrington mansion. Douglas had moved out the day after the board vote, leaving no forwarding address. We need to negotiate. Negotiate what? Nolan snapped. A surrender? He's destroying everything. He's destroying what we took from him. Preston corrected, a new understanding in his eyes. And he's doing it by the book. Every lost contract, every withdrawn guarantee, it's all legally sound. He created fail-safes we never saw. What about Blackstone? Nolan turned to his mother. Can't he help? He's been advising us for months on this transition. Mary Ann's expression darkened. Richard isn't returning my calls either. Apparently, his position at Miller Pharmaceuticals has been reinstated. He's leaving for Boston tomorrow. Miller Pharmaceuticals? Preston echoed. Our direct competitor? The one Dad always refused to partner with. The same, Mary Ann confirmed, realization dawning on her face. Your father must have made some calls. Outside the mansion, Douglas sat in his car, listening to the conversation through the security system he still controlled. He started the engine as a text message arrived from Leonard Morrison. Phase 2 complete. Board members Petrosky, Williams, and Chun have requested private meetings with you. They're jumping ship. Douglas smiled grimly as he drove away. The foundation of his children's betrayal was crumbling faster than even he had anticipated. Chapter 6. The Abyss Stares Back. 10 days after the coup, Harrington Innovations resembled a sinking ship. Employees cleared out their desks as rumors of bankruptcy spread. The stock had been temporarily suspended from trading after falling 68% in a week. Nolan Harrington barricaded himself in the CEO office, his father's former sanctuary, surrounded by empty liquor bottles and emergency financial reports. The phone rang constantly with calls from panicked investors and angry board members. Preston, meanwhile, worked methodically to salvage what he could, meeting with remaining clients and trying to stem the exodus of top talent. He returned from one such failed meeting to find his brother in a destructive rage. The Singapore office is gone, Nolan slurred, throwing a crystal paperweight against the wall. The entire development team resigned this morning. All 28 of them. They're joining Dad's new company, Preston confirmed, straightening a fallen picture frame, a photograph of their father accepting an Industry Innovation Award, along with most of our research division and the top sales directors. How? How did he orchestrate this so perfectly? Nolan demanded. We had the votes. We had control. We had the titles. Preston corrected. Dad had the relationships. The Morrison contract alone was 20% of our annual revenue. We need to sue him, Nolan decided, reaching for the phone. Corporate sabotage, tortious interference. Preston disconnected the call. With what money? Our legal fund is depleted after the last round of emergency measures. Besides, everything he's done is technically legal. He created exit clauses in every major contract and personally cultivated relationships with decision-makers for decades. The brothers' argument was interrupted by their assistant, announcing an unexpected visitor. Leonard Morrison, CEO of their former largest client, stood in the doorway, his expression grave. Gentlemen, I thought we should have this conversation in person. Come to gloat, Len. Nolan spat. Or did my father send you to deliver another blow? Morrison took a seat uninvited. Your father didn't send me. In fact, he advised against this meeting. But I've known you boys since you were teenagers, and I felt I owed you the courtesy of an explanation. We know the explanation, Preston said quietly. We betrayed him, and he destroyed us in return. It's more than that, Morrison replied. Douglas and I have been friends for 30 years. When my wife was diagnosed with cancer in '07, your father arranged specialists, covered treatments insurance wouldn't touch. When the lawsuit nearly bankrupted my company in 2015, he stood by me, restructured our contract to keep us afloat. He leaned forward, eyes moving between the brothers. Business is relationships. Your father understood that. You saw his client meetings as wasted time that could be spent on expansion. You saw his loyalty to long-term employees as sentimentality that hurt the bottom line. So this is punishment, Nolan concluded bitterly. This is consequence, Morrison corrected. Douglas didn't poach our contract. I terminated our relationship with Harrington Innovations the moment you forced him out. I sought him out to offer our business to his new venture. After Morrison left, Preston found his mother in the company apartment, packing her belongings. Her once impeccable appearance had given way to disheveled anxiety. Richard's gone to Boston, she said without preamble. He's blocked my calls. Blackstone was never on our side, Preston realized aloud. Dad must have approached Miller Pharmaceuticals weeks ago, arranged a position for him. Your father always said Richard was ambitious to a fault, Marianne admitted, sinking into a chair. I just never thought that he'd abandon you when things got difficult. Preston finished for her. The way we abandoned Dad. That evening, as the executive team prepared for an emergency board meeting to discuss bankruptcy options, Preston's phone rang with an unlisted number. Hello. It's time we talked, Douglas Harrington said, his voice steady and controlled. Bring your brother and mother to the lake house tomorrow at noon. Come alone or don't come at all. The next morning, the three of them drove to the secluded property in silence. They found Douglas on the dock, staring out at the water. He had lost weight, but his posture remained unbending, his presence commanding even in casual clothes. As they approached, he turned to face them, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. You wanted to talk? Nolan began defensively. So talk. Douglas studied him for a moment before replying. Harrington Innovations will file for bankruptcy protection by the end of the week. The board has already approved the measure as of last night's meeting. You've destroyed a 30-year legacy, Marianne accused, her voice breaking. Your life's work. No, Douglas corrected calmly. You three destroyed it. I merely ensured you couldn't profit from your betrayal. What do you want from us? Preston asked, the only one willing to acknowledge their desperate position. Douglas gestured toward the house where they could see several cars parked. Inside are the board members who have resigned from Harrington Innovations. They've agreed to back my new venture, along with Leonard Morrison and 6 other major clients. He handed Preston a folder. This is my offer, the only one you'll receive. Inside were 3 identical documents, severance agreements that would release them from any financial obligation for the company's collapse in exchange for their remaining shares, which were nearly worthless anyway. You're cutting us out completely, Nolan realized, rage building in his voice. Just as you did to me, Douglas confirmed without emotion. The difference is, I'm offering you a clean break rather than the public humiliation you deserve. And if we refuse? Marianne challenged. Douglas's smile was cold. Then I'll proceed with the evidence I've gathered of your conspiracy with Blackstone, including recorded conversations in his condo planning my removal. Industrial espionage carries significant penalties. Nolan lunged forward, but Preston held him back. You were recording us? That's illegal. Actually, Washington is a one-party consent state for recordings, Douglas corrected. But feel free to challenge it in court. The publicity would certainly be interesting. Preston, always the more pragmatic brother, studied his father with new understanding. You knew all along, didn't you? You let us think we were winning. I gave you every opportunity to reconsider your course, Douglas replied. Instead, you declared, and I quote, "This company is ours now, old man." Rather definitive, wouldn't you say? Marion stepped forward, tears threatening. Douglas, please. 36 years of marriage has to count for something. His eyes, when they met hers, contained no warmth, no recognition of shared history. It counted for nothing when you laughed and said my time was over. Remember? He turned away from them, gazing back at the lake. You have until tomorrow to sign the agreements. After that, my generosity expires. As they walked back to their car in defeat, Preston glanced back at his father's solitary figure on the dock. He never trusted us, he said quietly. Not really. Would you have trusted us? Marion asked, the weight of her choices finally settling on her shoulders. In his position, Nolan said nothing. His rage collapsed into numb acceptance as they drove away from the lake house, away from the empire they had briefly claimed and definitively destroyed. Chapter 7. Ashes and Embers. The bankruptcy of Harrington Innovations dominated business headlines for weeks. Medical tech giant collapses after founder's ouster ran alongside analyses of the company's spectacular implosion. Industry experts puzzled over how a stable, profitable enterprise could disintegrate so rapidly. Meanwhile, Douglas Harrington's new venture, Harrington Medical Solutions, announced its formal launch with Leonard Morrison's healthcare conglomerate as its flagship client. The press release mentioned the strategic partnership built on decades of mutual respect and shared vision. a pointed contrast to his previous company's demise. Preston Harrington read these developments from a rented apartment in downtown Seattle, having been forced to sell his lakeside condo to cover mounting debts. The severance agreement he'd signed protected him from the company's collapse, but did nothing to shield him from the professional fallout. 6 job applications, 6 rejections, all citing organizational fit concerns as the reason. His phone rang. Nolan, calling for the 3rd time that day. "Have you seen it?" Nolan demanded without preamble. "Seen what?" "Dad's interview in the Financial Times. He announced the Malaysian expansion for his new company. Using our exact plans, Preston. The ones you developed." Preston sighed, rubbing his temples. "They were company plans, Nolan. Developed using company resources. We don't own them anymore. He's systematically erasing us," Nolan continued, his voice tight with restrained fury. "I can't even get calls returned from people who used to beg for 5 minutes of my time." "What did you expect?" Preston asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "We staged a coup against one of the most connected men in the industry. Did you think people would line up to hire us afterward?" The silence on the other end suggested Nolan hadn't considered this outcome. Preston continued, "Has Mom called you?" "Not since last week. She's trying to sell the house, but Dad's lawyers put a lien on it. Something about community property disputes pending the divorce." After hanging up, Preston found himself staring at the business card Douglas had handed him as they left the lake house. It contained only a phone number, nothing else. He'd kept it against his better judgment, a lifeline he wasn't yet desperate enough to use. His doorbell rang, interrupting his contemplation. A courier delivered a small package. Inside, a newspaper clipping about Harrington Medical Solutions winning the Malaysian contract, paperclipped to a note in his father's distinctive handwriting. "The foundation matters." Preston studied the cryptic message, remembering his father's insistence on building proper foundations for any endeavor. It had been a constant theme in childhood lessons. Whether building a model airplane or planning a business strategy, Douglas Harrington emphasized starting right. The company Preston and Nolan had briefly controlled had been built on a foundation Douglas laid over decades. Their coup had ignored that foundation, treating the company as merely assets and revenue rather than relationships and trust. Across town, Marion Harrington sat in her attorney's office, reviewing divorce papers that stripped away any claim to Douglas's new business ventures or personal assets acquired since their separation. "He's being unnecessarily punitive," her lawyer observed. "The prenuptial agreement is 36 years old. We could challenge it." "No," Marianne said quietly. "We won't. Mrs. Harrington, with all due respect, your husband is worth considerably more now than when this agreement was signed. You're entitled to—" "Nothing," she interrupted. "I'm entitled to nothing. The agreement stands." Later, as she packed the few personal belongings Douglas's lawyers had permitted her to remove from their home, Marianne found a small wooden box in her vanity drawer. Inside was a handwritten letter dated 6 months earlier. "Marianne, if you're reading this, then what I've suspected has come to pass. 36 years deserved better than betrayal. I've always known when you're lying." Your left eyebrow twitches just slightly. It twitched when I asked about your late-night calls to Richard. "I built my first company for us. This last one is for me. Douglas." She closed the box, understanding now the moment when everything changed. Not the board vote, not the public humiliation, but months earlier when he had first recognized her deception and begun planning his response. Meanwhile, Douglas met with Leonard Morrison and Samuel Westbrook at his new company headquarters, a modern glass building overlooking Elliott Bay, purposely visible from his son's former offices. "The Malaysian contract is just the beginning," Douglas explained, reviewing projection charts. "With their partnership, we'll expand into the Southeast Asian market by 3rd quarter. "And your family situation?" Westbrook asked carefully. The 3 men had been friends for decades, their children growing up together at company picnics and holiday gatherings. Douglas's expression remained impassive. "That matter is concluded." "Doug." Morrison leaned forward, concern evident in his voice. "I've supported every step of this. They earned what happened, but they're still your family." "No," Douglas replied, his tone final. "Family doesn't conspire against you. Family doesn't betray trust built over decades. The people who did those things merely share my DNA. As his friends exchanged worried glances, Douglas continued reviewing the expansion plans, his focus entirely on the future he was building from the ashes of betrayal. Chapter 8: Desperate Measures. 3 months after Harrington Innovations declared bankruptcy, Nolan Harrington sat in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of Seattle, nursing his fourth whiskey. His designer watch and custom suit, remnants of his brief tenure as CEO, contrasted sharply with his haggard appearance and the establishment's worn interior. "Another," he signaled to the bartender, sliding his premium credit card across the counter. The bartender returned moments later, embarrassment evident in his expression. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card was declined." Nolan stared in disbelief, then fumbled for his phone to check his account balance. Zero. Impossible. He transferred funds just yesterday to cover his expenses. As he scrolled through his transaction history, a new entry appeared. Account freeze. Legal proceedings. Before he could process this information, his phone lit up with a call from Preston. "Did you authorize a leak to TechWire about Dad's military contract?" Preston demanded without preamble. "What? No. What are you talking about?" Someone gave detailed information about Harrington Medical Solutions' pending Department of Defense contract to the press. "They're claiming security vulnerabilities in the proposal." "Wasn't me," Nolan insisted, though the idea sparked interest through his alcohol-dulled mind. "Why would you think it was?" "Because Dad's lawyers just filed a cease and desist against you specifically. They've frozen your accounts, pending an investigation into corporate espionage." "That's absurd. I don't have access to any of his company's information." "They're claiming you used your remaining industry contacts to gather confidential details." "They have evidence, Nolan. Emails, phone records." Nolan's blood ran cold as realization dawned. "I'm being set up." "By who?" "By him." Nolan slammed his fist on the bar, drawing stares from nearby patrons. "He's still playing us, Preston, creating situations where we look guilty." After hanging up, Nolan stumbled to his car, only to find a parking boot attached to the wheel and a notice of repossession on the windshield. His wealthy playboy life was unraveling thread by thread, each strand cut by an invisible hand. The following day, Preston received a similar blow. The small consulting firm that had tentatively offered him a position rescinded the offer, citing concerns about ongoing legal issues. When pressed, the HR director reluctantly mentioned that they'd received an anonymous package containing documents from Harrington Innovations' collapse, suggesting Preston's direct involvement in mismanagement. Marianne, meanwhile, faced social exile. Her former friends, wives of Douglas's business associates and board members, declined lunch invitations, and charity committee positions suddenly became filled. The divorce proceedings advanced with mechanical efficiency, each filing systematically dismantling the life she had built. Desperate for income, she approached her former interior design clients, only to discover that Douglas had made donations to their preferred charities in amounts that made refusing him awkward and accepting her services impossible. "He's everywhere," she confided to Preston during a rare family dinner at his apartment. "3 charities have returned my volunteer applications. The gallery where I used to serve on the board suddenly decided to restructure their leadership." "He's isolating us," Preston agreed, pushing food around his plate. "Professionally, financially, socially. Why not just be done with us?" Nolan demanded, agitated after a day spent with lawyers trying to unfreeze his accounts. "He's won. Why keep punishing us?" Preston studied his brother and mother thoughtfully. "Because punishment isn't the goal. He's teaching a lesson." "What lesson?" Marianne asked bitterly. "That he's more powerful than we realized." "That actions have consequences," Preston corrected. "That foundations matter. That what we destroyed can't be easily rebuilt." Later that week, Nolan reached his breaking point. After another rejected job application and increasing legal pressure, he drove to Douglas's new corporate headquarters, demanding to see his father. Security refused him entry, further enraging him. "Tell Douglas Harrington his son is here." Nolan shouted in the lobby, creating a scene as employees watched uncomfortably. Tell him to face me himself instead of hiding behind lawyers and bank freezes. Security finally escorted him out, but not before he spotted his father watching from an upper-floor window, expression impassive as he observed his son's public meltdown. That evening, Nolan showed up drunk at Preston's apartment. He was watching Preston, standing there like some emperor while I was thrown out like garbage. "You need to pull yourself together," Preston advised, helping his brother to the couch. "This is what he wants, to push us until we self-destruct." "What's your solution then? Roll over? Accept defeat?" "No," Preston said thoughtfully. "I think it's time we acknowledge what we did and take responsibility for it. Apologize." Nolan scoffed. "After what he's done to us. After what we did to him," Preston corrected. "We took his company, Nolan. His life's work. We plotted behind his back with his wife and trusted colleague. If someone did that to you, what would you do in return?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but understood. That night, as Nolan slept off his intoxication on the couch, Preston made a decision. He retrieved his father's business card and dialed a number. "This is Douglas Harrington," the familiar voice answered. "It's Preston. We need to talk." A long pause followed. "The lake house. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Come alone." The next morning, Preston arrived at the secluded property to find his father splitting wood on the dock, a weekend ritual from his childhood that Douglas had maintained even at the height of his corporate success. Still using the old axe, Preston observed, approaching cautiously. Douglas set down the tool, studying his younger son without warmth or hostility, simply assessing. "It's reliable. Gets the job done. Like you," Preston acknowledged. "Underestimated you." "We all did." "A common mistake," Douglas replied, gesturing for Preston to sit on a nearby bench. "I assume you're here because your situation has become untenable." "I'm here because I owe you an apology," Preston said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "What we did was wrong. Not just strategically miscalculated, but fundamentally wrong." Douglas's expression remained unchanged. "And your brother and mother? Do they share this epiphany?" Nolan is still too angry to see clearly. "Mom is..." Preston hesitated. "She's suffering." "As intended," Douglas confirmed without remorse. "Actions have consequences, Preston. Yours destroyed something that took me a lifetime to build." "I know," Preston admitted, "and I can't undo that. But I'm asking, not for forgiveness, but for an end to the active campaign against us. You've won. We're defeated. Continuing to systematically dismantle our lives serves no purpose." Douglas considered this, his gaze turning toward the lake. "What do you think the purpose has been, Preston?" The question caught him off guard. "Revenge? Punishment?" "No." Douglas shook his head slightly. "Education." As father and son sat in the morning light, a flock of geese passed overhead, their reflection rippling across the still water. Neither spoke for several minutes, the weight of destroyed trust and blood bonds hanging between them. "I have a proposition for you," Douglas finally said. "Just for you." Chapter 9, Empire of Ashes. 1 year to the day after the coup at Harrington Innovations, Douglas Harrington stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, accepting the Innovator of the Year award for Harrington Medical Solutions' revolutionary cardiac monitoring system. "Thank you," he addressed the assembled industry leaders and press. "This recognition belongs to the dedicated team who believed in our vision and brought it to life." From his seat at the head table, Preston Harrington watched his father command the room, not as the bitter victor in a family war, but as the visionary leader he had always been. The past year working under his father's mentorship at the new company had been challenging and humbling, but educational beyond measure. Douglas had accepted Preston's apology at the lake house that day, but made it clear that forgiveness and trust were separate matters. The job offer he extended came with strict conditions. Preston would start at the bottom, with no special treatment, no path to leadership unless earned through demonstrated loyalty and competence. "Success isn't inherited," Douglas had told him. "It's built, brick by brick, relationship by relationship. You want shortcuts? I'm offering you the long road instead." Preston had accepted, grateful for the opportunity when no other company would touch him. The work was demanding, the scrutiny constant, but for the first time he truly understood what his father had built and how. As Douglas concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause, Preston noticed a familiar figure slipping into the ballroom through a side entrance. Nolan, significantly thinner than a year ago, his once impeccable appearance now merely presentable. The brothers hadn't spoken in months, not since their final argument when Nolan discovered Preston had accepted a position with their father's new company. "Traitor," Nolan had shouted. "After everything he's done to destroy us, you're crawling back to him?" "He didn't destroy us, Nolan. We destroyed ourselves," Preston had replied. "I'm trying to rebuild something from the ashes." Now, as the formal program concluded and guests mingled, Nolan approached their table, determination evident in his stance despite his obvious discomfort in the setting. "Congratulations on the award," he said stiffly to Douglas, ignoring Preston entirely. Douglas regarded his elder son with clinical detachment. "Thank you. I'm surprised to see you here. I need to talk to you," Nolan continued, his voice low and urgent. "About Mom." Douglas's expression didn't change, but Preston detected a slight tension in his shoulders at the mention of his soon-to-be ex-wife. "What about her?" Douglas asked, his tone betraying nothing. "She's in the hospital," Nolan explained. "Exhaustion, they're saying, but it's more than that. She's given up. The divorce, the social isolation, the financial pressure, it's crushing her." For a moment, something flickered across Douglas's face, concern, perhaps, or memory, before his features settled back into impassivity. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said finally. "But her condition is no longer my concern." "She made a mistake," Nolan pressed. "We all did. But 36 years is exactly why her betrayal cut deepest," Douglas interrupted, his voice suddenly hard. "This conversation is finished." As Nolan opened his mouth to protest, security approached, summoned by a subtle gesture from Douglas, and escorted him from the ballroom, creating another scene that would further damage his already tattered reputation. Preston watched the interaction with conflicted emotions. He had spent a year working to understand his father's perspective, even coming to acknowledge the justice in his response to their betrayal. But the calculated coldness toward his mother and brother still disturbed him. Later that evening, as the celebration continued at a private reception in Douglas's penthouse overlooking the city, Preston found his father alone on the balcony, contemplating the skyline where Harrington Innovations had once dominated. "You could ease up on them," Preston suggested carefully. "Mom and Nolan, you've made your point." Douglas didn't look at him. "Have I? Your brother still believes he was entitled to take what he wanted simply because he wanted it. Your mother still believes 36 years of marriage should outweigh her betrayal." "And what do you believe?" Preston asked. "That punishment should be eternal?" Douglas turned to face his son then, his expression softening slightly, the closest he came to warmth these days. "The consequences of their actions aren't punishment, Preston. They're reality." "Reality can change," Preston suggested. "You gave me a second chance." "I gave you an opportunity to earn a second chance," Douglas corrected. "You've spent a year doing exactly that, starting at the bottom, working harder than anyone else, rebuilding trust brick by brick. Have they done the same?" Before Preston could answer, Douglas's assistant approached with an urgent message. They were needed in the conference room where several key investors had gathered. The conversation about family was set aside as business took precedence, a pattern Preston had come to recognize as his father's way of compartmentalizing the personal pain he refused to acknowledge. 2 days later, Preston visited his mother in the hospital. Marion Harrington had indeed lost weight, her once vibrant presence diminished by stress and isolation. The divorce had been finalized the previous month, leaving her with the settlement outlined in their decades-old prenuptial agreement. Comfortable, but far from the luxury she had grown accustomed to. "Have you seen him?" she asked immediately, hope flickering in her tired eyes. "Every day," Preston confirmed. "I work for him, remember? Does he ever mention me?" Preston hesitated, unwilling to wound her further with the truth, but equally unwilling to offer false hope. "No, Mom, he doesn't." Tears welled in her eyes. "I made a terrible mistake, Preston. Not just the affair, but forgetting who your father truly is, what he's capable of when betrayed. You couldn't have predicted this, Preston offered, though he no longer believed it himself. The signs of his father's strategic brilliance and unforgiving nature had always been there, visible to anyone willing to see them. I could have, she disagreed. I should have. 36 years. I watched him outmaneuver competitors, dismantle threats, build empires from nothing. I just never thought he'd apply those same skills against his family. Preston took her hand, understanding now the full scope of their miscalculation. They had seen Douglas as the patriarch, the successful businessman, the husband and father, roles they believed gave them leverage over him. They had failed to see him in his most fundamental form, a strategist who never forgot a loyalty or forgave a betrayal. The following week, as Harrington Medical Solutions announced its expansion into European markets, another milestone eclipsing the legacy of its predecessor company, Nolan made one final desperate attempt to reconcile. He arrived at Douglas's office unannounced, having bribed a security guard with his last valuable possession, a Rolex watch gifted by his father upon his college graduation. 2 minutes, he pleaded with Douglas's surprised assistant. That's all I'm asking. Douglas emerged from his office, expression cold but controlled. You've gone to extraordinary lengths for this meeting. I need help, Nolan admitted, the words clearly painful for him. The legal fees, the frozen accounts, I'm drowning. And you're my father. Nolan exploded, frustration overwhelming his planned approach. Despite everything, despite what we did, despite what you've done in return. Douglas studied him for a long moment before responding. Blood isn't enough, Nolan. It never was. Trust, loyalty, respect. These are the foundations of any relationship worth having. You destroyed all three. So that's it? Nolan asked, desperation giving way to resignation. You'll help Preston, but not me? You'll forgive him, but not your wife of 36 years. Preston earned his place, Douglas explained with clinical detachment. He started at the bottom, worked 16-hour days, rebuilt trust through consistent action rather than desperate words. He acknowledged not just that he was wrong, but why he was wrong. And Mom, Douglas's expression hardened. Your mother made her choice. She chose Blackstone. She chose to betray decades of partnership. She chose to laugh when you declare my time was over. Choices have consequences. Blackstone abandoned her the moment things went south, Nolan argued. Isn't that punishment enough? That wasn't punishment, Douglas corrected. That was inevitable. Richard Blackstone has abandoned every relationship when it no longer served his ambition. I warned your mother of this 15 years ago when I hired him despite his reputation. She chose not to listen then, just as she chose not to value loyalty later. As security arrived to escort Nolan out, Douglas added one final observation. The company collapsed in a week because it was built on borrowed loyalty. Remember that if you ever build anything of your own. 6 months later, Harrington Medical Solutions celebrated its second anniversary as the industry leader in precision medical equipment. The company that had risen from the ashes of Betrayal now employed over 500 people, including Preston Harrington, who had worked his way up to a respectable middle management position. At the anniversary gala, Douglas took the stage to announce a new research initiative dedicated to advancing cardiac care for pediatric patients. As applause filled the grand ballroom, he caught sight of his former wife entering quietly through a side door. Mary Ann had recovered her health and some of her former elegance, though her designer gown was from a previous season rather than custom-made, as had once been her preference. She stood at the back of the room, watching the man she had betrayed command the audience with the same charisma that had first attracted her decades ago. Douglas acknowledged her presence with the slightest nod. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, merely recognition of a shared history, now concluded. She returned the gesture before slipping out as quietly as she had entered. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Preston found his father on the rooftop terrace, gazing at the city lights below. Mom was here, Preston observed, joining him at the railing. I saw her, Douglas confirmed. Nolan wasn't. No, he wasn't. Preston hesitated before asking the question that had haunted him for months. Will you ever forgive them? Douglas considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than hard for once. Forgiveness requires repentance. Preston, your brother still believes he was entitled to what he tried to take. Your mother still believes her betrayal should be excused because of shared history. And me? Preston asked quietly. Have you forgiven me? Douglas turned to his son, studying him with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, including his own. You're here, aren't you? Working, learning, rebuilding. Actions matter more than words. Preston, they always have. As they stood together, overlooking the city, the lights of their new empire gleaming against the night sky, Douglas Harrington completed his lesson. He had lost a family, but preserved his legacy. He had transformed betrayal into opportunity, turning the ashes of what was taken into the foundation of something stronger. His sons had declared, "This company is ours now, old man." His wife had laughed, saying, "Your time is over." They hadn't realized the company's biggest client was loyal to him personally. One phone call, and their $100 million contract had vanished. The company had collapsed in a week. They had come begging. But Douglas Harrington never begged. And he never forgave betrayal, not even from those who shared his name and blood. The empire he rebuilt from ashes served as both his vindication and his vengeance, a monument to the cost of underestimating a man who had spent a lifetime turning setbacks into victories. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.